Hello and welcome to the Be Better Belmont virtual town hall. We're really excited to be hosting this event. My name is Aisha and I'm a class of 2013 graduate from Belmont University. I will be moderating this event along with Rebecca Dryden, class of 2011 graduate. On behalf of everyone involved in tonight's event, I want to thank you for joining this community-wide discussion about for-profit prison groups, their relationship to Belmont University, and their impacts on the community. Before we begin, I want to say a little bit about our organization. We are Be Better Belmont. We're a coalition of students, alumni, and community members committed to ending Belmont's relationship with the prison industrial complex. As some of you may know, CoreCivic, one of the largest for-profit prison systems in America, is a major donor to Belmont University and has several active members on Belmont's Board of Trustees, including CoreCivic CEO Damon Heiniger. As a coalition, we want Belmont to divest from their financial relationship with CoreCivic and correct a pattern of governance practices that fail to clearly align with their stated faith-based values. Our approach centers around asking Belmont for clarity, transparency, and accountability while pushing for 5 overarching demands. First, we want Belmont to define anti-racism as a core part of Belmont's mission. Second, we want Belmont to disclose their financial practices and investment criteria around their endowment, especially as it pertains to for-profit prison groups. Third, we want Belmont to divest from financial influences that involve the prison industrial complex. And fourth and fifth, we want Belmont to develop their student body and deepen their relationship with the Nashville community through socially just and equitable anti-racist practices and local community initiatives. Wow, that was a mouthful. If you want to read more, you can go to our website at bebetterbelmont.com to read our full letter of demands. Over 700 people have signed on to this letter, and we have a following on social media of over 2,000 people. Again, that's bebetterbelmont.com. So over the summer, while Belmont has acknowledged systemic racism and the value of Black life, they have not acknowledged how their governance and financial practices may contradict this goal. Notably, they instead speak abstractly about how the Christian faith shapes the university's approach to teaching, learning, and community, rather than how those same principles inform the way the administrative decisions are made. Be Better Belmont and other community members believe that Belmont's value system should promote accountability to their students, alumni, and the Nashville community with regards to their financial partnerships and decisions. Thus, we feel that there is no theological or ethical reason why an appeal to Christianity should prevent a conversation about accountability. And that's exactly what we're here to do today. We just want to have a discussion in the spirit of an informed democratic dialogue, which is not too dissimilar to the dialogue Belmont hopes to have in the upcoming presidential debate they're planning on hosting on October 22nd. Of course, we're disappointed that Dr. Fisher is not here today and has not responded to our invitation to attend this event. But we are here today to do something important. We want to open the floor to a critical conversation surrounding the complexities and realities of systemic racism, religion, and the privatization of prisons, and explore what that means about the complicity of institutions and their accountability to their community, to us. And we are joined today by 4 amazing folks whose work involves the prison industrial complex in various sectors, leaders of political, campus reform, faith, and activist circles. Panelists include 2020 U.S. Senate candidate Reverend Robin Kimbrough Hayes, a founding member of Georgetown University GU 272 advocacy team Melisande Short Colomb, Beach Creek Missionary Baptist Church pastor and director of the Center for Equity, Change, and Sustainability, Reverend Davy Tucker Jr., and Kathy Carrillo of Southeast Immigrant Rights Network and the Mix Nashville, a grassroots activist organization that advocates for immigrants' rights amongst other causes. This discussion will contain 3 parts where Becca and I will be moderating and switching off to ask the panelists questions. And then we will get questions submitted from the audience. If you have a question during this event, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom to submit your question. We also want to thank Liberate Interpreters Cooperative for translating this event live in Spanish for our Spanish-speaking audience. Thank you, and now I'm going to turn it over to Becca, who will begin with our panelists.
Thank you, Aisha, and thank you all for being here. We are really excited about this conversation. So we're going to start with some questions to get some more information and understand our panelists' relationships to private prison. Like many institutions with influence at this time, Belmont has received a lot of pressure to respond to racial injustice with meaningful action. In late July of this year, following the diversity learning sessions that occurred in late spring, Belmont University issued a memo to students and alumni outlining the school's plans to increase diversity and inclusion. However, in our analysis, this memo failed to address systemic racism in 2 major counts. There was no statement regarding Belmont's ties to core civic, and there were no actions taken to improve the university's personal accountability by way of the administration and the board. The silence on the matter suggests that efforts to combat racism have not and will not extend into any of the institution's financial or governance policies, strategies, or reviews. In other words, Belmont's plan to be part of the solution to systemic racism does not involve any of their own systems at all, so far at least. In our first topic, we would like to invite the panelists to tell us how their life experiences shaped their views of systemic racism, the criminal justice system, and education in the US. So I would like to start with Reverend Robin Kimbrough Hayes. Reverend Kimbrough Hayes, will you share with us a little bit about your professional background in criminal justice law and activism, and how that informs your current stance on criminal justice reform?
Thank you, Becca, and I want to thank all of you all for allowing me to share on this platform this evening. I am an attorney and I am also a chaplain. So I always find it a rare opportunity where I can bring both of these together. And as we look at the social justice issues facing our nation today, they are not just social issues, but they are theological issues which demand a theological response. I started my legal career off working as an assistant attorney general. I spent some time working for the Department of Children Services, and spent the bulk of my legal career as the legal counsel for the Tennessee Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. And there I became an expert on the issue of violence against women and how this issue demanded a theological response. And it really inspired me to do the Senate run for Tennessee. And on this run, what else motivated me to fight for the people of Tennessee were these issues of social justice and change. And they are theological. When we talk about deprivatization of prisons, we do not want to create a market of human beings. This is wrong, and it is against God's simple command to love neighbor as thyself. So when we look at healthcare, issues, Jesus healed. There was no requirement for insurance. Jesus provided healing to whomever who wanted to be healed. So the work that I did in domestic violence and in the criminal justice system has inspired me to fight for people who are underserved, fight for people who don't have a voice. And this is what Jesus did on this earth for his 33 years of living and his 3 years of ministry, which led him to a cross. And of course, and I'll end on this note, Jesus is definitely interested in criminal justice. He was an innocent man who was executed. And we still have this going on today, and we need change. So thank you. for this opportunity to share.
Thank you so much. That's powerful. We're going to move to Melisande Short-Colomb. Thanks for being here, Melisande. Really, really happy to have you as well. Could you, a lot of Nashville folks might not be as familiar with the Georgetown advocacy team and the work you've done there. Can you just tell us a little bit about it, the core tenets, and kind of how that situates justice, reparations, and history?
Well, hi, thank you very much for inviting me and allowing to participate. Before I go into the hows and wherefores, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the people, the voices, and the persons who we speak for and represent, who inhabit the spaces around us, but who cannot be here to speak for themselves tonight. And in other places, situations, and across town somewhere, there are great debates going on about the soul of our nation. And those people may or may not make the necessary changes. But the reality of what is happening here is that this is where change is made. In small groups of small people who come together for the common goal of doing the right thing. To identify, to stand up and to say, despite everything that you do, we are here and we're not going anywhere. The Georgetown student advocacy team is no longer functioning. It no longer exists. It did the work that it was brought together to do, and that was to put a referendum before the undergraduate voting body of Georgetown University students for them to vote to take from their pockets $27.20 per semester in perpetuity to go into funding the university's relationship to the descendant community beyond the walls of the university. Because as an institution, if all you can offer is what you are already doing, your offer is inadequate. So the students, the advocacy team, the students did their work. They voted yes. And once the students voted yes, the institution then said it belongs to us. It has to go through the processes of the institution to be implemented. And the institution said, you know what? We're not going to do that. We acknowledge what you did and what you do. And when institutions educate, they expect those who have educated to go out and make a difference in the world. But if you can't make a difference in your block, in your school, in your home, in your community, then you are poorly educated and ineffective in your responsibility to your nation, to your country, and to your society. So that's that.
Thank you. Melisande, can I ask just a follow-up for those who maybe didn't see you on Samantha Bee or, you know, any of those other things?
Right.
Can you share with us just a little bit about what brought you to attend Georgetown undergraduate as
Sure.
an adult?
Yeah. What brought me to Georgetown is the reality that I am the granddaughter of a woman or women who arrived here in the Maryland colony in 1676 and 1715. They came here, as most women were coming at the time, as indentured servants. And because of the color of their skin and the circumstances that were changing to create the institutions of slavery, my grandmother, Ann Joyce, who was born on Barbados, traveled to England, and came to the United States with the 3rd Lord Baltimore, Charles Calvert, worked her indenture, and then because she had 2 children who were born during the time of her indenture, she and her children were incarcerated because they were bastards in the language of the colony. And that was the forfeit of her freedom and the lives of her children. But the bastards that the daddy was, he was a white man and he was a founder of the United States of America. And he didn't go to jail and he didn't lose the damn thing. So I am the current representative and the speaker of 11 generations of Black American womanhood.
Wow, thank you for sharing that with us. That's profound. Well, to shift gears, good luck following that powerful testimony. Just kidding, you'll be great. Reverend Davy Tucker Jr., we just wanted to know a little bit about your background, your time as a jail administrator for Davidson County Sheriff's Department, and how that career in corrections influenced your current activism and current religious convictions and calling, that sort of thing.
Okay, well, I too must say thank you for this opportunity to share, to talk about such a large issue that I believe it's high time that our country and even our people of faith actually deal with. I'm a native Nashvilleian, joined the Marine Corps, was in the Marine Corps 9 years and got out in the mid-'80s. And during the time you could get a job, basically, there was heavy recruiting for the post office, the police department, or you could get hired at the jail. And for whatever reason, I picked the jail. From there, during that time, 86 or so, the Davidson County Jail was under a federal court order for unconstitutional conditions. And so it was during that time that I became part of the first classification program. And what I was most taken aback by was I knew so many people there. And that seemed to have played out over the course of time that I was there. I ultimately left there, went to work for a private prisoner transportation company called Transcorp America that was based here in Nashville, that was ultimately purchased by CCA. And I stayed there till I think 2001. As I came through, I was born and raised in North Nashville in the Cheatham housing projects. Mother raised 4 kids. And to get out of the Marine Corps, to get a decent job, at one point, just the idea of having benefits qualified as a decent job, that the questions that we would have around jobs, pay was not the first thing. You were even more desirable as a mate when you had a job with benefits. So a city job had benefits. You had insurance, you had a retirement, you had days off. So you got paid if you did not go to work, which were and still are the plight of many folk who really just want some benefits. And so to go into corrections, it was not something I wanted to. I know I did not want to be a police officer, but there was a connection with the people element of that. And so during my time there of trying to make a difference, I was also the pretrial release supervisor, which at that time was a federally funded program that the government had started to recognize that the problems within the money bail system. And so I was part of that team that would screen people and get them out. The city did not have to post a bail, but the city basically stood, and that program is still in existence today here in Nashville, where the city basically stands in for the bail. And there's never a time when governments have not recognized the impact that resources play into the system. Well, the longer I stayed, the more I began to awaken to it, but also, again, coming from housing projects, I did not know I was poor until I joined the Marine Corps. I was beginning to make decent money. And when I went to TransCorp, the money really got decent. But it was during several of the particular projects that we were working on that it became apparent to me that even when I could not articulate nor understand what my problem was with what I was doing as a job, it was something that started to nag at me. And the more I could see what the munitions were, that this was all on purpose. And so suddenly I could see how human bodies were turned into a commodity, and they all had a price. And most of those bodies were Black and brown and poor folk. And so in 2000, when I left, since the calling into the ministry, but even with that, going forward, you continually deal with people who have encountered the criminal justice system in some regard. And just over time, particularly since the passage of the major crime bill in the mid-90s, which increased many times the rates of incarceration that go on in this country, it also expanded that prison industrial complex. It's all of those peripheral industries that support the snatching of bodies by the state. And while I understand that what we're here to talk about primarily is private prisons, let us not miss that there is an entire industry that is predicated upon the incarceration of people from not only just private prisons, but you have healthcare, food service, supplies, phone services, GPS tracking, probation, parole, urine testing, counseling. All of these things make up this vast industry that can only generate revenue by the snatching of bodies. And I think at some point for me, it became apparent that if our society says one of our members need to be removed from the society, fundamentally for me, the society has a responsibility to bear all the costs for that. It does not, and that is for me is a moral and ethical position that when a court or a jurisdiction or an entity says you can't be with us for a while, the assumption to me is that you become the responsibility of the state. And the private prison industry with the whole prison industrial complex has found a way to monetize that. So I would say that we would not have the rates of incarceration, nor would we have the fines and fees and things that we would have if the state, the government, did bear the cost of incarceration. They would not so readily say to a person who was sentenced to, say, doing time for a burglary conviction, they would not sentence them, they would not say that as part of your probation or your parole that you need to get a drug test every week. Not if they had to pay for it, but because they don't have to pay for it, they will set conditions that don't help individuals reintegrate, but they really try to surveil and continue to control. That's why recidivism rates are so high. When you look at what they call technical violations, that means that the person went back to jail not for recommitting a crime. That means that they did not follow some condition of their release. And so for people of faith, regardless of what stripe of faith you are, I believe your faith has to always show up in your lived behavior. And that becomes the disconnect for me. Because here in America, we have different Christianities. And Jamar Tisby does a great look at that, The Color of Compromise, in his new book that talks about how what I call white American Christianity has always been complicit in the issues of race, even up to allowing this system here. Many of the people that you talk about, that you name, I know them. And at some point, we have to realize that this is not in the best interest of humanity, and it's damn sure not in the best interest of what is just and right.
Amen. Thank you. Thanks, Reverend Tucker. Kati Carrillo, we have a question for you next. Will you tell us a little bit just about your background and your work with the Mix and your current work with Southeast Immigrant Rights Network, and just how you've seen immigrant advocacy play out in Nashville, and specifically how CoreCivic ties into some of that advocacy?
Yeah, of course. First of all, I'm just so incredibly honored to be in a space with such amazing leaders, and my heart is just warmed by all the words that each of one of you have said before me. So I just wanted to express that gratitude to be in this space as a young person, to learn from you all. Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about my experience here as a Latina, first generation daughter to immigrant parents in this country. I'm also a Nashville native. I was born at Nashville General Hospital. And, you know, this city has been my home for so long. And I've been so incredibly blessed to have so many different people in the city be influences to the work that is being done today. The Mix is a community group. You know, we love and work with our nonprofits, but we chose to not be a nonprofit on purpose in order to continue pushing forward the community work that needed to happen, to make sure that people are being represented and to make sure that our young people are able to find a way to help their community and really have control over the situations and the ways that we move in and out of community, right? And so the Mix was started in 2018, so we are actually 2 years old this year, and we are fresh and young, and we are still learning, and a lot of the work that we do has to do around immigrant rights advocacy, because that is the demographic of our group. A lot of our families and friends have either been affected by detention or currently affected by detention, or have the possibility of being affected by detention. And I think that, specifically for myself, the catalyst of when am I organizing was one of the very first events that, not that I attended or spoke at, but one of the events that I held was because of a death that happened at a core civic facility in Stewart Detention Center, which is down in Georgia. And it was because of a young man whose family touched my life, and I was able to help with through their legal case of this man, just their mental illnesses being ignored, all of the different situations that these facilities put these inmates in these situations where they're not receiving adequate medical attention, where their civil rights are being violated constantly. And I think that, you know, my family being one of the families who was affected by detention, it was so important for me to understand and to be able to fight against these for-profit prison complexes that are much larger than people realize, right? And the thing that led me to do it here in my own town was because I saw how much Core Civic had their blood money in our city, how deeply that money runs in our city, to the point, you know, where they have influences over education systems, where they have influences over public policy when they shouldn't have that access to those things, especially when that money is made off of the body of Black and brown people like myself and like those in my community. And also recognizing like the lack of, I mean, just this year alone, we have seen how inmates have been, these people have been overly exposed to COVID. Their own guards, they're not willing to protect their own guards, to the point that there were mass COVID breaks even amongst their own guards. And it's really about like the impact that this has on our community as a whole. And, you know, for us, it's about trying to figure out how exactly we can both educate young people about this thing and to make them realize that it's a lot of a deeper issue than most people think, and showing them what are the ways that they can participate in this fight, to talk about, you know, all of these things. And so I'm very grateful for Be Better Belmont. In 2017, we led a march from the Dragon Park. I can't remember its name right now, but we led a march where thousands of people marched to Belmont asking Dr. Fisher to end the relationship with Damon Hinninger, who is the CEO of Core Civic. During that time, there were several students who met with Dr. Fisher, and instead of being acknowledged and heard of their concerns, they were ignored and pushed aside and told that this was not an issue that they should be concerned of, even though it was their education, their money, their alumni that was continuing this relationship. And so I think this is a testament, right, that 3 years later, we're still having this conversation, that he's not present is also, you know, an alert, that, you know, these things have to change, and we have to figure out what are the ways that we continue to push for this change. But yes, I see a comment down there. Yeah, there were tons of students to try to have these conversations. And so I'm grateful that there's now a bigger platform for people to be able to do this through and to educate themselves at, right? So that they can go in empowered, ready to talk about the facts of what the effect this for-profit prison industry has.
Yeah, whew, thank you. I remember that march, and there were so many people just flooding the streets. So there's momentum, and has been, in the community around this issue. So I'm excited that we're having this conversation. I'm going to pass it over to Aisha now to go into kind of the next section of questions, and let her take it from here.
Thanks, Becca. Katya was definitely like on point when she was talking about how this is not something new that Belmont is being told about. Like, there was 1,000 people march. You cannot get more visual than that. Students have expressed concerns about Core Civic and Belmont, but Belmont's leadership continues to maintain that this is like not a cause of concern, because the privatization of prisons does not contradict the university's financial and governance strategy. In fact, we ran a phone campaign and an email campaign where many students this summer emailed him, Dr. Fisher, and called him. And Dr. Fisher and other leaders of the administration said something along the lines of, we're accepting the quote, unpleasant reality of the need for prisons in our society, unquote. And that while there is a difference of opinion on whether private prisons are better managed by corporate entities or government agencies, Dr. Fisher says that Belmont, quote, has no position on which is better. This implies that for Belmont, there's not an obvious reasons why they should not partner with entities who profit off mass incarceration and commoditize bodies, because prisons themselves are just inevitable. They're just an inevitable part of our society. But in order to have a constructive conversation about the stakes of these financial partnerships and their alignment with Belmont's Christian mission, we really need to explore, what does this difference of opinion mean in terms of public versus private criminal justice entities? Why is one worse than the other? And I want to start with Reverend Kimbrough Hayes. You mentioned this earlier, especially from like a theological perspective, but given your time in as a lawyer, I also would like for you to describe what are some of the government costs and gains of private versus public prisons. What are the stakes here, and how has this shown up in Tennessee?
This is a really good question, especially now that Nashville has gotten rid of Core Civic, or this decades of contract with Core Civic. It is finally gone. So there are several reports, depending on who's doing the research, that talk about the cost savings. So you might have someone who leans toward the privatization of prisons and saying that this is all good, that we're actually saving money, outsourcing, taking care of our prisoners. But if you really look at the data, there's really no cost savings here. It's really a cost, it's a cost deficit. It's a cost deficit for government, and it's a cost deficit for human life. As Kathy just mentioned, she talked about, I believe, the death or injury of someone in a Core Civic prison. This happens all day long. I volunteer with the NAACP as I'm the state legal redress chair, and I get prison complaints all the time about Core Civic and its treatment of its prisoners and treatment of injuries that have resulted, and even wrongful death cases. We have got to do something about the privatization of prisons. We need to pass national legislation to deprivatize prisons, because they are not cost savings. There are corporations making money, just as Reverend Tucker said, off the backs of human beings. And this is not the purpose of the prison system. So we could really open up other dialogue about recidivism. Are we really making effective use of funding when it comes to prisons? Are we really incarcerating the right people? And we need to really evaluate that and come up with more progressive prison reform. We need to repeal mandated sentencing. We need to legalize marijuana, because we have people in these prisons who have marijuana charges who are serving more time than a rapist. So we have got to really do something to reform our prison system. And we've got to vote, because when you look at the leadership that's in place, they're connected to other leadership that's elected. And we must vote out leadership that does not care about human beings, that cares more about politics than people. And unless we vote now, and especially on November 3rd, we cannot make change. Core Civic will continue to be the culture of incarceration if we do not get out and vote and keep fighting for prison rights. I'm going to close on this note. Recently, I've been taking court appointments down at the Davidson County Court. Court appointments are generally for people who cannot afford an attorney. So I'll invite everybody to go down to look at that docket down at the Davidson County Court. And I would say at least 95% of the litigants down there on the defense, on the criminal dockets are African American. They are Black and brown people. And if they're not Black and brown, they're poor. And we have got to do something. I don't believe that just this population is committing crimes. We have got to address the Driving While Black study here in Nashville. We have got to hold law enforcement accountable. And we have got to have a more progressive way to respond to crime in our communities.
Thank you so much, Reverend. That was a really, really powerful response. And I'm glad you had it backed up with data. As a data nerd, that speaks volumes, in addition to everything else that you said. I want to ask my next question to Kati. You mentioned earlier about your work with the mix. Will you also talk about what are some of the recent shifts in immigration policy since 2016? What has caused like the influx of immigration control, and how is this related to private prison corporation and the prison industrial complex, especially in Tennessee and Nashville?
Right. So I think there are different ways that we can take a look at this, but the bigger one is I want to take a zoom out on the lens and talk about the family separation policy, which is what we were fighting against in 2017, where parents and children were physically separated and put into different facilities, to the point where you had like all of these children moved all around the country and parents trying to figure out where their children have been placed. And this was very intentional, right? We just saw the article come out this week where DOJ representatives were saying we have to separate the children, right? That this was intentional to do this. And I think that, in that viewpoint, Dilly, which is one of the family correction centers, is a core civic facility, which means that one of the facilities that was holding these children and separating them from their families is core civic, right? So they were benefiting off of what was happening. And because of that, the company was actually grew in profit during those years. In 2018, they estimated having somewhat of like $2 billion in profit from the contracts that they had received from the US government, whether that was the marshals, whether that was local officials, or whether that was ICE themselves. I think it was something around like, oh, sorry, sorry, Brendan. I think it was something around like 27% of their total revenue came specifically from ICE contracts, right? And I think that that goes to show you that we have to follow the money, right? They're like Reverend Hayes said, they're doing this purposefully, right? They're doing this because of the money and where the money is coming from. And there is no difference between what is private and governmental, right? And yeah, so when we bring it into Nashville, we can really see this reflected in the ways that, in Tennessee, we can really see this reflected in the ways that enforcement has increased all over the nation, specifically in Tennessee, where we saw raids happening in meatpacking plants, right? You had people who were going to work, came home, going to work and trying to come back home, and their children didn't know where they were because they had been captured up in this meat plant raid. And we've continuously seen these different type of immigration policies where the different policies have changed for asylum seekers to where, people who qualified before aren't able to qualify now. We have seen changes in policy with DACA, where even though the Supreme Court ruled that DACA was eligible to continue, the Department of Homeland Security has refused to continue accepting new applications. We have seen TPS, which is a temporary protected status, be canceled out. And we know that all of this is being done to criminalize Black and brown bodies, right? Because when we talk about who are immigrants and who are refugees, those include both Black and brown bodies. And so I think, to us, we see that core civic benefits from the change in immigration policy, because if the changes happen and those people need to be held somewhere, then guess who steps up to hold them? right? And it's CoreCivic. It's these people who are creating these facilities because they know that they can make billions of dollars off of these bodies. And the exchange here, the reason how they make these billions of dollars is by cutting costs around medical, around food, around clothing, to the point where we have seen this not just in CoreCivic, but in several different facilities, in several different companies of detention centers, where, you know, for example, what we've heard most recently is about the women who went through unconsented hysterectomies in Irwin Detention Center, also in Georgia. And these women did not only have these medical concerns, but were also given dirty undergarments. So they developed infections. You know, you have the men who have gone on hunger strikes in different CoreCivic facilities because they were protesting the environments that were happening, as far as like the air conditioning, which they control, the food, which they control, which would make them sick, which would make them physically ill and weak. We have seen hunger strikes happen constantly in these facilities as these detainees advocate for themselves, right? And so I think specifically to Nashville, we have continuously argued how unprepared CoreCivic has been to handle their own facility here in Nashville, to the point where several infection outbreaks have happened. There have been several issues with CoreCivic in Nashville as far as their budgeting goes. And this was the year that Rotten to the Core, if you guys don't follow them, please go follow them on Facebook. Rotten to the Core did an amazing job to push for CoreCivic to be kicked out of Nashville, right? Because we realized how much that was impacting our community in the sense of not keeping their own employees safe, which then dangers Nashville, right? Because if you're going in and working as a guard into a facility in Nashville and these people don't have your best interest in mind, when you come back out, you were exposing your community, right? And in turn, you're also exposing the detainees. And so, you know, I'm super, super proud of the work that Rotten to the Core has done, which Mix has been a part of to help amplify certain pieces of that. And I think that for that reason, it's so important, right, for us to be able to continue having these conversations. Sorry. Yeah, so, you know, I think that, sorry, I got a message. I think for that reason, right, we're seeing, you know, just how Reverend Hayes mentioned, we see like this continuing, not just in immigration policy, but in criminalization of Black and brown bodies. We see policies continue to be made in order to help fill these facilities, right? Because if you have a 1,400 bed facility and it's not filled, you're losing out on money, right? So what are the ways to do that? It's to create policy and to create legislation that ultimately harms Black and brown bodies to be able to fill the facilities. And so there's so much going on there and so much more that we expect to happen as the administration has, you know, announced that they're going to be attacking sanctuary cities, whatever that means. I think that there are several opportunities for people to be able to get involved and to actively work against those things as we continue.
Thank you so much. That was such a great answer and really speaks to the history of how entangled this is in terms of like policy and government. It's really telling that Nashville is divesting from CoreCivic, but CoreCivic is still finding a place to hide behind Belmont and the institution that is Belmont, which holds a lot of power in the city of Nashville. My next question is for Reverend Tucker. Reverend, you mentioned before about how your experience in prison, in the prison industrial complex, shaped your point of view as you're going through your career. I wanted to ask you, in your perspective change, I wanted to ask you, how does your perspective differ from other people who are in similar positions of power, especially in Nashville, who are leaders in the community like yourself?
Well, a whole lot. First, I'll say that many folk, and I would say people of faith, have this law and order mentality. and they don't know what that really means. Law and order really just means feed the prison industrial complex. Law and order has nothing to do with public safety. But as I went through my career, I had to answer a couple of questions for myself. Are Black and brown people more predisposed to criminal activity? And are we just by DNA more criminal? Well, that's a resounding no. So I began to question, why was I constantly with Black and brown folk as it related to their entry into the criminal justice system? And slowly over time, because you know, when you're young yourself, you just got a job, but it started to make sense that what we have created here is a system that will, as Kathy said, they create policies to continue to feed that system. I can recall during my time at Transcorp, late 90s, used to be the buses at the various entry points along the southern border would send 7 or 8 buses a day. They just put people back on the bus, send them back over there. Well, there's a group who got together and is still around, this advocacy group that most of these participants in the prison industrial complex use for their lobbying, is a group called Alex. And they began at that time to create this scheme that instead of doing what we've been doing, they said, well, we would run them through the system so that they won't come back. Well, we all know that that doesn't happen. So suddenly it was the private prisons who stepped in to say, we'll house the immigrants that you detain. I worked with Damon Henniger in the late 90s to open up the Elizabeth, New Jersey immigration detention facility. And all those beds were predicated on people being incarcerated, irrespective of why they left their home country. And so, but again, it's all tied together. And when people of faith side with the idea of legality, that I'm clear, everything legal ain't right. And so, but for many of us, that's the only bar that we reach for. If it's legal, then it's right. Well, no. And the caging of Black and brown and poor bodies is even more insidious. If we're not going to talk about systemic racism that has been part and parcel of this idea of America from the very beginning, you're not going to get to this issue right here. At the core of this issue is the looming census that says that whites will be the majority minority, and the system that they set up, this governmental system that they set up, is so hard now to change. We were never, Black, brown folk were never supposed to be able to get into policy-making positions. Well, now that's a possibility. So accompanying with the incarceration, which always takes your right to vote, takes your right to own a firearm, but then you carry this mark around with you that even in our own communities, we will raise our eye when we hear, or we'll even ask, particularly in hiring, does the person have a record? Doesn't matter what it's for. Just if we have not unlearned that behavior ourselves, we still participate in that. That helps make this system make sense. Well, American Christianity has always been complicit with race. That's why church is still the most segregated hour in this country. It's because the Christian faith seems to ride the same rail as this nationalistic thought that seeks to protect the status quo. Well, here you got this industry that's in here, and this industry does not care. It eats up whatever is given to it. And unless we dismantle it, it will continue to grow unabated. And just for the record, CCA left Nashville because I think they were really trying to flex to see if they could not maybe get the city to come back to the table. But what happened on the day that Darren Hall took over the old CCA facility, it was 120 some odd employees. Every last one of them got a raise. Every last one of them got better benefits. So while I'm not going to contest what Robin Hayes said, but in bidding jobs, one of the biggest numbers are your payroll numbers. So you pay less, you control the overtime, you manage the areas that you can. So what ends up happening is cities have accounting practices that determine how they count stuff. A lot of times in private business, you determine how you count it. You determine whether it's the EBIT, EBITDA, how you post it to where you have all these non-cash transactions that create this idea of what you want it to say. So I do think cities make it easier to be sold on privatization. Here's a good example. The city was trying to purchase some Ford vans. Well, when they do their specs from their office, they wanted all this stuff that didn't come in a stock van. So the factory has to create and run a van and it was just stuff like tilt wheel and captain seat, whatever. Well, it adds $1,500 to the vehicle immediately. But if that's what the city wants, then the city will pay for that. CCA will come in, we're not getting that vehicle. We're going to get a van, but it won't be that van. So I think in their selling of it, they're able to show ways that are convincing to the numbered people. But long-term, what happens is it further erodes the trust. They can have a contract that guarantees them 95% occupancy and only have 50% of the people there. Well, if the city had that, then they could regulate their staff. But if we don't, again, understand the connectiveness and the insidiousness that all of this gets back to the issue that has never been resolved in this country, is the issue of racism. I can recall when your school about a decade or so fell out with the Southern Baptists because they felt that they had become a bit too liberal. Well, even in that push for Belmont, the idea that because this is a legal enterprise, it makes it right. But there is nothing right about profiting off of the snatching of someone's body. And until we get to that issue, particularly when the disproportionateness that happens. And as Brian Stevenson said, it's better in this country to be rich and guilty than to be poor and innocent, because that predetermines the outcomes as you enter into this system. And so as we talk about Core Civic and the supporting companies and businesses, I think it's a learning thing for all of us, particularly around the theological issues of representing the image of God in all of us and making money and commodifying folk. For me, it's just part of this slaveocracy that's always been this way. As Michelle Alexander called it, the new Jim Crow. Yeah, this is just a new way that we doing slavery, is that, but it's all part and parcel. Even the development of our policing in this country, it was never made to police white people. If you just look at something as simple as the mask mandate here in the city, the fear of the police of saying that we're not going to enforce the mask mandate was around the group that it would be enforced upon. And hence the policies and the things that change when people don't have the economic and the political power, then they always lose out.
Thank you, Reverend.
And you should not give me that large of a pause, because as a preacher, we can easily.
Okay, I'll try to be faster. Thank you so much. My next question is for Melisande. So previously we talked about private versus public prisons. But one of the things I wanted to ask you was institutional complicity and responsibility. Belmont and CoreCivic have financial ties, they have financial partnership. Damon is on the board. What responsibility do institutions of higher education, Belmont as an example, have to acknowledge and address their relationships to slavery, especially as we've seen that the prison industrial complex is an extension or is equivalent to the slaveocracy?
Well, I think we have to first address slaveocracy. And there's nothing about the incarceral system that exists in 2020 that was not founded in determining 100% of African people born into the United States into slavery were incarcerated, had no freedom. See, because everybody talk about freedom, the only way freedom matters to you is if you have not had it. And everybody protecting their freedom and signing on the dotted lines of protections of and creation of their freedoms with the blood, sweat, tears, and bodies of other people, and not their own blood, sweat, bodies, and tears, is a travesty of American and Americanism and world economics that we quite frankly don't have enough Jesus for right now. And you better pray up on some more. Because Jesus just might be renegotiating his contract on whether or not his death justifies what you do. Because see, a whole lot of people counting on Jesus to pull them through, and it ain't gonna happen. The institution is the economic foundation of the modern world. And that came out of Spain with Ferdinand and Isabella, Christopher Columbus, and a boatload of Jews who couldn't live there no more. And the incarceral system and everything about it is rooted and founded in the 1859 fugitive slave law that gave every white person in America the right to tell a Black person they were slave and send them south to slavery. If it was about the money then, and it wasn't about Jesus then, it ain't about Jesus now, and it's still about the money. I am a person of faith. My faith ain't got nothing to do with my politics. And I'm not gonna let anybody in the United States of America insinuate their politics into the history of economics or their spirituality, your Jesus, whoever you want, call on. That don't get you off. You may be a person of faith, so am I. I don't hide behind my faith. I use my faith as a shield and a sword. I'm not on the edge, I am the edge.
Whew, Melisande, thank you for that. Yes, I think we're all breathing for a moment.
Hypocrisy? I'm not going to participate in that. And anybody who wants to put on that nice, oh, we're all going to be hypocrites together here and lie in one another's faces after 245 years, people, I don't have to do that. And I'm not going to.
Yeah. Thank you all for this. This is powerful stuff. We're going to, not to slow down the momentum, but we're going to go into our third section. And because we really want you all to be able to have some discussion and to also answer some of the questions from the audience, we're going to truncate some of the questions we had written up, just to make sure that we can have some dialogue. So just to kind of lead us in there, we want to talk about a little bit about Belmont's recent diversity initiatives that acknowledge the campus's complicated history with slavery dating back to the 1800s. These measures ignore Belmont's academic history with core civic persons and entities. Belmont University's relationship with core civic dates back to 1983, when the Corrections Corporation of America, CCA, that since in 2016 was renamed Core Civic, was established through major contributing donations by Jack C. Massey.
That was the same year Ronald Reagan and George Bush were cocaine dealers and were bringing crack cocaine into the United States of America to flood Black communities.
Yep, she said it. So Massey, Belmont students and alum will definitely recognize that name. Massey was a donor to Belmont, a big donor, and the Jack C. Massey Graduate School of Business was named in his honor, obviously, in '82. The early '80s, which Melisande was just tying in, marked the first major spike in mass incarceration, in modern mass incarceration in this country through the establishment of the prison industrial complex and the war on drugs. So while we, as Be Better Belmont, obviously support Belmont's efforts to address systemic racism, the refusal to take responsibility for the implications of Belmont's relationship to core civic as part of these efforts raises critical concerns regarding the sufficiency and efficacy of their efforts. In our last topic before Q&A, we just kind of want to give you a chance to discuss the importance and limitations of addressing one's past and present relationship to systemic racism, and how institutions and leaders might begin addressing the terrible consequences of the historical enslavement and ongoing erasure of Blackness. So we, instead of having you each kind of go through a question, we just want to sort of open it up for you all to talk amongst yourselves, whoever wants to jump in. And I think there's some really interesting intersections of all of your work that really are powerful and paint a really big picture of what Core Civic does in communities and in Nashville. So what we wanted to ask and foster some discussion around is just what you all think it would look like for people in positions of power to take responsibility for their actions, especially with regard to systemic racism and specifically the criminal justice system. So, like, what things do we need to do to hold each other accountable, particularly people in positions of power? So I know you all have a great answer for this. Whoever wants to take it away, and if you all want to respond to each other, or however you all want to engage with each other, we just want to offer that space here.
I'd like to say, as young people,
you have to acknowledge. And the idea of acknowledgement is saying the same thing. And we've never said the same thing about our past. That's in our history books. That's even as we discuss it now. No one wants to talk about reparations, none of that. So for me, if you never acknowledge, if we cannot agree on what the problem is, we cannot expect to have a just outcome. And Becca, people in power will not make right decisions without being forced, because they've gotten used to the power, and the power provides them with this idea of safety. But throughout human history, when people join together, even now, there's always been this divide to try to keep Black and brown people separate. And we have not been intentional enough, because we allow that to happen. But the minute folks come together and stop cooperating, because capitalism needs cooperation, and when the masses stop cooperating, then they always come to the table. And so, just as you say, so what has to happen? Maybe y'all need to stop going to Belmont. Maybe individuals need to put more pressure on CCA, because to ask folk to do something that they have no intention because it's profitable to them, it's not going to happen. So it's going to take the people rising up, pushing them, disrupting their system. Because how is it that you take this idea of capitalism, particularly from a theological perspective, when capitalism is not going to be the market in heaven? Or that is not the desire of the God of everything. Well, maybe it's not socialism, communism either, but it damn sure is not capitalism, because capitalism is predicated on X number of people on the bottom supporting one person on the top. I don't know what that algorithm is. It probably floats by region and all this other stuff. But until we can say the same thing about what the lived history in this country is around Black and brown people, that's only the starting place of trying to come to how do we fix that. For me, even in my theological grounding, the good news is not good news for everybody. But we've created this idea that the good news is good news for everybody. No, it wasn't. The good news was for the poor. The good news was for the oppressed. And it was a call for repentance of the powerful. But we just make this thing all about it's for everybody. That's BS. And until we take this fake fallacy around faith that has no lived reality and throw this garbage away, things are going to stay the same. People have to continue to do things like this, come up with ways to stop the system, because again, it's all connected. One of my passions also is this whole criminal justice issue, is the idea of wealth-based detention, which sets people up for ultimate incarceration. When you lock someone up on bail and you can set a bail that you know that they cannot pay, then empirical studies have shown that they are more likely to cop a guilty plea just to keep their case moving while they'll hopefully get out of jail. We have to find another way, because it's that system that holds people and starts forming them to go into the prison system, all the way through the system. Policing, it targets certain people. The court system sentences and is more harsh towards certain people. The probation and parole system, well, even just the incarceration system, but then the probation and parole system on the end. All of this is one big fish, and if we can't name it, then we're not going to be able to change it. That's my 2 cents on that.
I would like to suggest that the students at Belmont College reach out to historically Black universities in Nashville as well, and formed some coalitions and some partnerships with students at universities just like yours who have the same issues that you are concerned with, but perhaps because of the color of their skin, they are more impacted than you are. So you might want to reach out into the community instead of fighting, and you have to fight the institution, but you must also build in the community. And the only way you have to get in the belly of the beast to give the beast heartburn. So the system has worked beautifully for people. The system is not broken. The system is not in disrepair. The system is functioning as it was created. That it's not functioning to your benefit means you got some work to do.
I wanted to add to this conversation by looking at one piece of the justice system we have not mentioned, and that is judges. And we are on the, Donald Trump is trying to run through a Supreme Court appointment. It's that the Supreme Court is the highest court of the land. People didn't pay attention to it until it's become newsworthy now. I believe that Donald Trump has pushed through, and fact check me on this, about 200 district court judges that have a conservative lean that will hurt the interests of poor people, will hurt the interests of immigrants, that will hurt the interests of Black and brown people. We have got to look at our judges, and we've got to look at our judges here in Nashville. They're voted on every 8 years. We're going to have all judicial seats will be open in 2022. We need to pay attention to who is sitting in these seats with black robes.
I'm sorry.
Because this is last statement. Becca, you asked about leadership and what we need to address systemic racism. We need leadership on all levels that know that their power comes from the people and that the people is their power.
And I would also suggest that people challenge the idea that the only lifetime appointment to a position in the United States of America is that of a federal judge.
Well, here in Nashville, for the judicial state courts and the general session courts, they are elected here. There's another process for the appellate courts, which we need to pay more attention to here.
You do.
Because they set law.
Yes, they do.
Sentencing, they set law on judicial or prosecutorial conduct. They set law on sentencing and what is considered sufficient evidence. So all of this is at that level. Reverend Tucker, I'm gonna yield to you.
On that. Please reach out to the Nashville Community Bail Fund. We're setting up a court watch system, and we're going to need all the help from the community to be able to come up with this judges scorecard. We are working on that. The Nashville Community Bail Fund recently sued the criminal court judges over a rule that would allow them to extract fines and fees out of the cash bails that we post for individuals. We got a temporary injunction on that, and I feel like we're going to ultimately win the case on that. So we are trying to concretize, but what happens is people can't just talk about it. You can't tweet about it. You can't post it on Facebook. Folks got to show up to actually get the work done. We're going to need massive amounts of people to pick dates and times We are already trying to set up what that scorecard is, how you would look at that judge. We want to compile all that data and make scorecards. But it takes everyday people to actually go to court and check those blocks off on those judges. Because if not, we won't have any real proof to say why this one can't be or this one can't be. I had a phone call from a judge the other day that's on the police commission wanting to talk to me about it. And she started with a real bad case for me, a bail case, and said that she just had a guy come into her court with a $5,000 bail, wanted it reduced to $2,000. And she says to me that her conscience would not allow her to do that. And I said, it's really interesting that your conscience only gets to play to people who don't have money. Because if I had the $5,000, I don't have to come ask you nothing. I just go post my bail. So how important is your conscience to public safety when it only can be used against the most vulnerable of our society? We criminalize poverty. And so right up what you're saying, we need people to help. And that's how we make the changes. It's actually getting in there doing the work.
I want to reiterate this as we are embarking upon a federal election and the election of some state legislators here in Tennessee. This notion of you have the power, this person has the power, has to be deconstructed because the power belongs to the people. When you win a leadership position, whether you're the president of the United States or you're a United States senator, you are only there by virtue of the power of the people, the votes of the people. And because of that, you got to serve the people. And I want to let everybody out there who's listening that if your person is not serving the people and not showing compassion upon the people and passion for the people, then they need to be voted out. And I don't care what color they are. I don't care what they say. They are a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, or whatever. If they are not serving you, I believe I'm on this panel tonight because I saw someone posting her passion for Tennessee. Because I got passion for Tennessee. You got to love the people. And this is where the theology comes in. You got to love the people. You got to love them even if they don't, you all disagree politically or on different issues. You still have to love them. You don't pass laws just not to talk to them, like we saw here in Tennessee with Governor Bill Lee. You go out and you talk to the people. You reach out to the people. You listen to the people. This is what we need leadership to do. We need leadership to follow the great commandment. Love thy neighbor as thyself. If your leader, if your judge, your whatever is not serving the people and loving the people, no matter what they look like or who they are, then you need to get rid of them.
I've said to my children, and we had during our advocacy team period when we were asking undergrad students to step up into positions of leadership in the United States of America and vote as a voting body of 18 to 22-year-olds to vote to pay reparations to a particular group of people who had been enslaved by the institution they attend. And this was because there appeared to be an absence of leadership by leadership. And what I have said to my children and what I said to my students and friends at the time was that in the absence of leadership, leaders step up.
Yes, thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Mr. Tucker, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I think I just wanted to kind of bring it back to, you know, this thing that everyone is talking about, history. And I think we have to remember and remind ourselves that, like, Belmont itself was built on Black bodies, right? It held several enslaved people. It benefited off of several plantations. The owners themselves, that honestly don't frankly deserve to be named, recognized, held hundreds of slaves. And I think that in order that is one way for both alumni and students to address like this like modern, to talk about like what modern enslavement looks like, and to talk about like how they continue to feed into that history. And exactly like Ms. Short-Colomb said, you know, this is so important for young people to talk about. How do we recognize how we're benefiting off of the systems that already exist? And how are we accepting that privilege as white or white passing people? And paying attention to what racial justice and equity looks like, and pushing forward to make sure that the HBU organizations and schools in our city are being given the same resources and fundings that this university is receiving as well, right? Because we see such a vast difference between all of the schools. And I think that like the way that Mr. Tucker, Pastor Reverend Tucker mentioned, is that, you know, maybe it does look like you stop from going to Belmont. Maybe it looks like a student sit-in. Maybe it looks like some type of organization that is outside of the systems that already exist, right? I hear, especially because we're in this election year, how important it is for people to vote. But I also wanted to push and encourage you to create your own systems and your own measures of accountability, because the systems that exist no longer benefit us. In fact, they are set up intentionally to harm us, are set up intentionally based off of white supremacy. And I think for that reason, we have to figure out how as alumni, how is the students that you figure out what that looks like outside of these things. And my other push is to follow the money, figure out where the money that these politicians that are running for office is coming from, you know, where their projects for their money is coming from, who they're conversing with, who they're bringing to the table in the way that Reverend Hayes brought up, right? Like who are they conversing with? Because if you're getting elected and then being sat in an office and that's all that you do, that's not really representing the people. And it does start with local policy, but more than that, it starts with creating in your community the ways that you're going to respond to this thing. And that means donating to the Nashville Bail Fund. That means donating to people like organizations like Free Hearts, who has done mass organization to help reinstate voting rights for people who had felonies. It means donating to like workers centers like Workers Dignity. It means volunteering for the Mix so that you can help defend your communities against ICE. There are physical actions that, sorry, Jorge. Sorry, Jorge. There are physical actions that you can take to help your community, to invest in your community and divest from these companies that just use the blood money to benefit themselves. Damon Hinninger is sitting in his multi-million-dollar home, not bothered by any of this. I don't know, maybe he's having dinner with Bobby Fischer, who knows? And that's the reality, right? They don't care. They don't care about what happens to the people down here. So we make them care by creating our own systems and holding them accountable through those methods and ways. So sorry, interpreters.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Let me just say this: as a graduate of American Baptist College, HBCU, one of the smallest HBCUs here in the city, it's that in our DNA is that resistance is therapeutic. So we don't have much, very small school. Sometimes people think we would close, but we have graduated some real earth changers from such a small spot. But when you participate in this capitalistic system, they tell you what to like, what not to like, who's in, who's out, what's on, and what's off. Part of that is creating your own matrix of success, teaching yourself to live from affirmation and not for it. Then the cost for your resistance is not so hard. So the idea of right has to start in here. Even if don't nobody else agree with you, it has to start in here. And that's what will move you. I tell most of the young activists all the time, because I feel their passion. I say all the time, I have been mad for decades, but you got to pace yourself so you don't burn up. This is a long journey. This is a long journey. And the only thing that sustains me is that I'm right. If not, I hear the famous philosopher named Stephen saying, this will always be Candyland if I don't believe that this is right. And that was a quote from Django if you didn't see it. But we have to do something else. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. That feels like a really powerful, solid moment to kind of wind down, though I feel like all of us could have this conversation for like hours. I really want to keep going, but in the interest of respecting everyone's time, and in case anyone wants to switch over to what I'm sure is a thrilling VP debate happening. We obviously didn't really get to many audience questions. Part of that is because you all are so knowledgeable and well-versed in this that you answered a lot of the questions people were typing in kind of like as the conversation went. But I do want to acknowledge and thank all of our participants and audience members for some really thoughtful, meaningful, impactful questions. And even though we're not going to have time to go through them here, I really want to encourage all of you who had a question or who didn't to keep having these questions. Don't shy away from them. Have these hard conversations and ask these hard questions of people at Belmont, of Dr. Fisher, of the other people in leadership at Belmont. You know, there's a lot that we would have wanted to hear from Dr. Fisher if he'd been here, but that just because he isn't here now doesn't mean that this conversation stops after this. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we got some great questions and that we have some amazing and very involved current students and alum, and just really grateful for you all for submitting some really thoughtful questions. So I'll hand it over to Aisha to kind of close us out. Yeah.
There's so much passion and energy, and just like, I feel like there's a screen here, but I feel like the physical warmth of like the love that we have for our virtual neighbors. I want to use this moment as an opportunity to say that we should take action. And one of the actions that our audience members can do if they care about the Be Better Belmont mission is to go to our website, sign our letter of demands, join the over 700 voices that are wanting to hold Belmont as an institution accountable for their complicity in this. Also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Be Better Belmont. And we're also going to be sending out a link to this recording. So if you want to catch it again, or you feel like you missed something, you'll be able to watch it, catch your favorite parts. We're also going to be sending out the links that our panelists mentioned. So that way you can donate to the National Community Bail Fund. You can read more about the resources and causes that our panelists shared. I just want to thank all of you for your time and energy in this discourse. I'm like, normally I'm a pretty put together person, but I'm like speechless, and it's like I'm filled with gratitude and just a deep, I'm honored to be even a face in this Zoom and to have the opportunity to learn from you four who are leaders in our community and are standing up for what is right, which I believe is our purpose on earth, is to serve each other and love each other. And I want to thank the audience for making yourself available to learn from these leaders. This is not an easy conversation. it can be heavy. And so thank you for taking the time away from watching the vice presidential debate, away from your family dinner to come spend this 90 minutes with us. And I also want to thank our community partners, especially the Nashville Peace and Justice Center, who have been a big support for us, and they are a big nonprofit in Nashville that is doing a lot of good, so please look them up. And Becca and I only represent 2 of the dozens of Be Better Belmont organizers that have worked tirelessly to put this event together. Countless hours, countless Slack chats, countless phone calls, early in the morning, late at night. So thank you all. Thank you for showing up. And again, thank you to our panelists. It's been a great honor and a privilege to be able to share this space from you, to learn from you, to hear your words. And also we want to preemptively thank Dr. Fisher and the Belmont leadership for hopefully watching this conversation. We're grateful that they have an intention to be part of the solution to end systemic racism. And we want them to hear this conversation and hopefully take Belmont in a more meaningful direction to make Belmont better. That is why we're here, for Belmont to be better, to really realize the education that we learned there and to make the world a better place, God willing. So thank you all for coming.
You're welcome. And thank you for having me. It's been wonderful. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
So much. I wish you all much peace as you continue this struggle for rightness.
Passion for justice.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this space and for this opportunity. Super grateful to everyone and to be in shared space with so many amazing leaders. Excited to see what happens and how we continue to hold Mr. Fisher and the Belmont administration accountable.
Thank you all. And thank you so much to our interpreters again, just again and again, thank you for that work. That accessibility is very important to us.
Thank you, Brenda and Jorge. We're so glad that this could be a dual language event.
I guess that's it. Have a great evening, everyone.
Enjoy the rest of your evening. Goodbye.